The command center's holographic displays cast a pale blue glow across General Kazera's scaled skin as she reviewed the classified files for the 5th time. Her inner spines bristled with growing horror at the contents. Casualty reports, strategic assessments, and most damningly, transfer orders that proved her own government had orchestrated the terrorist attacks against their civilian colonies. "Computer, verify authentication chain," she commanded, her third heart beginning to race. The other two maintained their steady rhythm, a trait her species had evolved for combat situations. Authentication verified. Source: High Command Internal Security, Level Ultra Black. The AI responded in its maddeningly calm voice. Kazera's claws tightened on the edge of her desk, leaving slight indentations in the metallic surface. 15,000 civilians dead in the Proxima colonies alone, all to justify increased military presence in neutral systems. Her own fleet had responded to 3 of these attacks, and she had personally written condolence messages to the families of the dead. The door chimed, announcing the arrival of her inner circle for the daily strategic briefing. Kazera quickly encrypted the files but left them open on her display. She had commanded the 4th Expeditionary Fleet for 20 cycles, and these officers had served with her through countless battles. They deserved to know the truth. Commander Vextal entered first, his ceremonial armor gleaming under the ambient lighting. Behind him came her other 5 senior staff members, each taking their customary positions around the oval table. Kizura noted with growing unease that none of them would meet her gaze directly, a serious breach of their species' military protocol. "My friends," she began, her translator converting her words into the formal military dialect, "I have discovered something that requires immediate attention." "General," Vextal interrupted, "another unprecedented breach of protocol. Before you continue, I must ask, have you shared these findings with anyone outside this room?" Kazera's combat instincts, honed over decades of service, screamed a warning. "No," she replied carefully, her hand sliding toward the ceremonial blade at her hip, a weapon that was supposed to be purely decorative. "Then we can contain this unfortunate situation." Vextal made a subtle gesture, and all 6 officers reached for their environmental controls. Kazera's enhanced hearing picked up the soft hiss of the ventilation system changing its flow pattern. A bitter scent reached her sensory organs. Biotoxin, she realized, already feeling the numbness spreading through her extremities. Her ceremonial blade flashed out, its monomolecular edge slicing through the ventilation duct above her head. Ancient survival instincts took over as she leaped, using her superior strength to pull herself up into the maintenance shaft. "Kill her." Vextal's voice had lost all its cultured refinement. "She cannot be allowed to reach the hangar." Kazera crashed through maintenance tunnels, fighting waves of disorientation as the biotoxin worked its way through her system. Her third heart had stopped completely, and one of her primary hearts was beating erratically. Security forces converged on her position, their plasma weapons leaving scorched trails along the corridors. She burst into the hangar bay, immediately noting that her personal shuttle had been disabled. Of course, they had planned this. Her eyes darted to the scout ships lined up along the far wall. Slower, less well-armed, but their systems were standardized. They couldn't have disabled all of them. A plasma bolt caught her in the shoulder, searing through her ceremonial armor. She staggered but kept running, her remaining functional heart pumping furiously. Another shot grazed her leg as she dove into the nearest scout ship's cockpit. "Emergency launch protocol. Authorization. Kazera Prime," she shouted, her translator glitching from damage. The ship's engines roared to life as more security forces poured into the hangar. Through blurring vision, she saw Vextal himself appearing at the hangar entrance, raising a heavy plasma cannon. The scout ship burst through the magnetic containment field, claxons blaring throughout the massive vessel. As she punched in blind hyperspace coordinates, Kazera realized that for the first time in her long military career, she was running away from a fight. But she needed to survive. Someone had to expose the truth, no matter the cost. The Montana storm raged with unusual ferocity as Mike Chen rushed to secure the last of his cattle in the barn. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the strange atmospheric disturbances he'd been watching for the past hour. Something about the clouds seemed wrong. They swirled in patterns he'd never seen in his 15 years of ranching. A massive oak tree, weakened by the unnatural lightning, began to topple directly toward him. Mike dove forward, knowing he wouldn't clear it in time. Instead of feeling the crushing weight, he heard a deafening roar and saw a shimmer of purple energy deflect the falling tree. Above him, a sleek vessel trailing plasma fire careened through the storm, its barrier field inadvertently saving his life before it plowed into his south pasture. Mike's combat medic training kicked in. He grabbed his emergency kit from the barn and sprinted toward the crash site, rain pelting his face. The ship had carved a deep furrow through his land, its exotic metal hull still glowing from atmospheric entry. As he approached, he noticed the hull was pockmarked with what looked suspiciously like weapons damage. A panel burst outward, making him drop to the ground. Through the steam and rain, he saw a tall figure emerge unsteadily, his breath caught. Even in the darkness, there was no mistaking the alien nature of the being. Nearly 7 feet tall, with scaled skin and spines that rose and fell along its head and neck, the creature moved with a predatory grace despite obvious injuries. The alien stumbled, catching itself against the ship's hull. Mike saw blue liquid, blood, streaming from multiple wounds. The creature's hand moved toward a device on its hip, and Mike tensed, expecting a weapon. Instead, it withdrew what looked like a small tablet. "Hold it," Mike called out, raising his hands to show they were empty. "I'm not going to hurt you." The alien pressed something on the tablet, and a mechanical voice emerged. "Medical assistance required." The translation was halting but clear. "Pursuit vessels incoming." Mike's decision was made in seconds. His time as a combat medic had taught him that everyone bleeds the same when they're hurt, even if that blood happened to be blue. "I'm a medic," he said slowly, pointing to the red cross on his kit. "Let me help." The alien's multifaceted eyes studied him for a long moment before it nodded, a surprisingly human gesture. As Mike approached, he saw the creature wore what remained of an ornate uniform, now shredded and burned. Military, he guessed, and high-ranking based on the decorations. "I'm Mike," he said, opening his kit. The alien watched his movements carefully while pressing more buttons on its translator. "General Kizara." The mechanical voice responded. "Fourth Fleet. Expeditionary Force." A pause. Then, "Former." "That's quite a title," Mike muttered, examining a severe plasma burn on her shoulder. "This is going to need more than my field kit. Can you walk?" "My house is just over that ridge." A new sound cut through the storm, a high-pitched whine that made Mike's teeth ache. Kizara's spines flared in what he interpreted as alarm. "Pursuit craft," she said through the translator. "You must leave me. They will kill witnesses." Mike thought of the oak tree that would have crushed him, deflected by her ship's barrier field. "Yeah, that's not happening," he said, sliding his shoulder under her arm to support her weight. "I've got an old storm cellar. If they're using any kind of standard scanning tech, the lead lining should mask our signatures." Kizara made a clicking sound that the translator didn't catch, but she accepted his help. As they made their way through the rain, Mike glanced at the alien general. "You know, this reminds me of my last tour in Syria. Never thought I'd be treating an alien fugitive in my storm cellar, but I guess life's funny that way." The whine of pursuit craft grew louder as they reached the cellar doors. Mike could only hope his years of combat experience would be enough to keep them both alive through whatever storm was coming. And he didn't mean the one currently raging overhead. In the dim light of the storm cellar, Mike focused on treating Kizara's wounds, trying to ignore the sounds of search vessels passing overhead. The alien general lay on his old military cot, her scaled skin glistening with a mixture of rain and blue blood. What fascinated him most was the rhythm he felt while checking her pulse, the alternating beats of multiple hearts. "You have 3 hearts?" he asked, applying a pressure bandage to her shoulder wound. The translator, now functioning better after Kizara had repaired it, converted his words perfectly. "Yes," she replied, her multifaceted eyes studying him with equal curiosity. "Two primary, one auxiliary for combat situations, though currently only one primary functions correctly." She paused, then added, "Your knowledge of trauma care is impressive for a species at your technological level." Mike chuckled as he cleaned another wound. "We make up for our tech gaps with experience. Humans have been patching each other up since before we had written language." He gestured to her shoulder. "Though I've never treated plasma burns before. Any advice?" Kizara started to respond but suddenly tensed. Her spines rose in alarm as she touched a neural implant behind her ear. 3 search parties approaching. Ground teams, not just aerial surveillance. Mike nodded, already moving to the cellar's small window. "They'll probably check the crash site first, then spiral outward." He grabbed his tablet, pulling up a map of his ranch. "How good is their tracking technology?" "They can detect my biological signature within 2 kilometers, Kizara said grimly. "And they will kill anyone who has had contact with me." Mike studied the map, years of combat experience clicking into place. "Your people ever dealt much with Earth wildlife?" When Kizara shook her head, he allowed himself a small smile. "Then we might have an advantage. My cattle herd has about the same body mass as you, and in this weather, they're clustered in groups of 3 or 4. Understanding flickered in Kizara's alien features, multiple thermal signatures of similar size. "Exactly. And that's not counting the elk herds in the north pasture." Mike was already pulling on his rain gear. "I'm going to spook the herds, get them moving in different directions. Should confuse their scanners." "Why?" Kizara asked suddenly. "Why risk your life for someone you don't know, who isn't even of your species?" Mike paused at the cellar door. "Because it's the right thing to do. And because I've seen what happens when good people stay quiet about government wrongdoing." He tapped his veteran's medallion. "Lost some friends that way." Kizara's translator clicked rapidly as she processed this. "Your species confuses me. You lack unified planetary governance, possess relatively primitive technology, yet demonstrate complex ethical frameworks and surprising tactical adaptability." "We're full of surprises," Mike grinned. "Stay here. I'll be back after I've given your friends a wild goose chase. That's an Earth idiom for misleading someone, by the way." As he slipped out into the rain, Kizara watched him go with growing fascination. In her centuries of military service, she had encountered dozens of species, but none quite like humans. Their technology was barely past planetary travel, yet this single human had already devised a countermeasure to advanced alien tracking systems using nothing but local wildlife. She checked her neural implant again, monitoring the search patterns of her pursuers. They were moving exactly as Mike had predicted, starting at the crash site and moving outward. Suddenly, multiple biosignatures began appearing and moving erratically across their search grid. The cattle and elk herds Mike had spooked into motion. Through the cellar window, Kizara watched Mike's figure dart between the herds, a small shape driving masses of Earth creatures in carefully chosen patterns. She found herself wondering if perhaps she had stumbled upon something her people had lost in their rise to technological supremacy, the ability to triumph not through superior technology, but through wit, wisdom, and an unfailing moral compass. Her remaining functional hearts beat in an unfamiliar pattern as she realized she was starting to trust this human, and that thought was both comforting and terrifying. The old mining tunnels snaked beneath Montana's surface like a labyrinth, their walls glistening with mineral deposits that played havoc with scanning equipment. Mike led Kizara deeper into the network, his headlamp casting long shadows as they moved. Above them, they could hear the faint hum of search vessels combing the countryside. The iron and copper deposits in these walls scatter most electromagnetic scanning frequencies, Mike explained, consulting a worn paper map, used to drive our mining equipment crazy back when these tunnels were active. Kizara touched the tunnel wall, her neural implant confirming his assessment. Impressive, though my pursuers will eventually think to search here physically. Counting on it, Mike replied, turning down a narrow side passage. These tunnels were used by bootleggers during Prohibition. They built all sorts of escape routes and hiding spots. My grandfather used to tell me stories. They reached a larger chamber where several tunnels converged. Mike pulled out a small bag and began setting up what looked to Kazera like primitive explosive devices. She watched him work with professional interest. Simple contact mines, she asked through her translator. Sort of. They're filled with red paint and skunk spray. When Kizera's translator struggled with skunk, Mike clarified. A local animal that produces an incredibly potent defensive odor. Your troops' environmental suits will protect them from the smell, but the paint will mark which ones entered the tunnels. Let us track their movements. Kizera's spines rippled with appreciation of the tactic. You're treating this like an insurgency. That's exactly what it is, Mike said, finishing his work. We can't match their tech, so we fight smarter, not harder. He gestured for her to follow him down another tunnel. Speaking of which, time for lesson 1 in guerrilla warfare. Over the next few hours, Mike taught Kizera the basics of asymmetric combat. They set up false trails, planted misleading evidence, and prepared ambush points using the tunnel network's natural features. Kizera found herself deeply impressed by the ingenuity of it all. Your species, she said during a brief rest. You've fought wars like this before. Mike nodded, taking a sip from his canteen. Throughout our history, whenever a technologically superior force invades, the locals adapt. Vietnam, Afghanistan, dozens of others. We're really good at being really annoying to invading forces. A sudden explosion echoed through the tunnels, followed by angry shouts in Kizera's native language. Mike grinned. First paint bomb found. Want to see something interesting? They crept to an observation point carved into the tunnel wall. Below them, 3 of Kizera's former troops stood covered in red paint, their sophisticated battle armor now looking almost comical. Their helmet sensors were rapidly cycling through different scanning modes, trying to compensate for the mineral interference. They're using active scanning, Kizera whispered. The minerals are throwing back false readings, multiplying their confusion. Nature's electronic warfare, Mike replied softly. Now watch this. He pressed a small remote detonator. Further down the tunnel, speakers he'd hidden began playing recorded sounds. Footsteps, voices, equipment movement, bouncing off the tunnel walls in a way that made them impossible to locate. The soldiers below immediately moved toward the sounds, falling right into the prepared kill zone. In these tunnels, their superior tech is actually a disadvantage, Mike explained as they watched the soldiers struggle. They're relying on sensors instead of their basic instincts, making assumptions based on their technological superiority. Kizera felt a profound shift in her understanding of combat. Her people had become so dependent on their advanced technology that they'd forgotten the fundamental principles of warfare. This human, with nothing but basic tools and intimate knowledge of his environment, was outmaneuvering elite alien troops. Another explosion echoed, followed by more cursing in her language. Mike checked his watch. They'll figure out it's a trap soon. Time to move to Phase 2. He glanced at her, ready to learn how humans handle pursuit in underground tunnels. Kizera found herself nodding eagerly, her remaining hearts beating with something she hadn't felt in years. The thrill of learning something completely new. Mike's old military satellite phone lay in pieces on the storm cellar's workbench, its circuits merged with components from Kizera's damaged neural transmitter. They had been trying to make contact with Earth's Defense Council for hours, but each attempt met with an unsettling response. Another redirect, Kizera said, her translator conveying frustration. 4th time they've transferred us to a special liaison office that doesn't exist. Mike stared at the final message that had come through. Situation contained. No further action required. His jaw tightened. They're stonewalling us. Question is why. Kizera's spines bristled as she accessed data through her neural implant. Several high-ranking members of your defense council visited my homeworld last cycle for diplomatic negotiations, including families. Hostages, Mike said grimly. Your people are holding their families to ensure cooperation. He picked up his old service laptop, pulling up news feeds. Look at this. 3 training accidents in nearby towns in the past day. All witnesses to your crash. The alien general's multiple hearts beat in a pattern Mike had learned to recognize as anger. They're eliminating potential witnesses while maintaining plausible deniability. A standard cleanup operation. Mike's phone buzzed. A text from Sarah, who ran the local diner. Got worse, he said, reading. Your people are posing as diplomatic security, showing up at businesses asking questions. Sarah says they're not asking so much as threatening. They'll start with soft intimidation, Kizara explained, then escalate to elimination once they've identified all potential witnesses. She paused, checking her implant. Based on standard protocols, we have perhaps 48 hours before they initiate a purge scenario. Mike ran his hands through his hair, thinking. I've got some contacts from my service days. People who operate, unofficially. They might be able to help spread the word about what's really happening. Your species has unofficial information networks that bypass government control. We've got nothing but unofficial networks, Mike said with a grim smile. Social media, independent journalists, activist groups, thousands of them. Once information hits those networks, it's practically impossible to contain. Kizara's translator clicked rapidly as she processed this. Your lack of centralized control actually makes information warfare more difficult for advanced species. We expect to be able to silence a few key sources, but your networks are like trying to catch water with a fork, Mike finished. He was already sending encrypted messages to his old contacts. Plus, every attempt to suppress information just makes people more interested in spreading it. A distant explosion made them both look up. Through the cellar's small window, they saw smoke rising from the direction of town. Kizara's spines flattened. Another sign Mike had learned meant serious concern. They're moving faster than standard protocol, she said. Someone high up must be pressuring them. We need to release the evidence now, before they can establish a full communications blackout. Mike nodded, fingers flying over his laptop keyboard. Already on it. I'm sending everything we have to every contact I trust, with instructions to spread it wide the moment any of us go dark. He glanced at Kizara. Fair warning. Once we do this, there's no going back. Both our governments will be after us. Kizara stood at her full height, her alien features set in what Mike had learned was determination. Your human concept of going back is irrelevant. The only path is forward, toward truth. Mike couldn't help but smile at her formal phrasing. You're starting to sound like a revolutionary. Perhaps, she said, her translator somehow conveying dry amusement. I have been spending too much time with a human who questions authority. Another explosion. Closer this time. Mike hit the final key, sending their evidence package to his network. Well, partner, ready to show them why humans have a reputation for being really inconvenient to oppressive authorities. Kizara's response was interrupted by heavy vehicles approaching the ranch. The time for planning was over. Now they would see if human ingenuity could stand against alien military might. Dawn broke over the Montana wilderness as Mike led his unlikely coalition through Blacktail Canyon. Local ranchers rode alongside veterans he'd served with, while 3 Native American trackers from the nearby reservation moved silently ahead of the group. Above them, the alien search vessels cast sweeping beams across the landscape. Your people aren't going to expect this, Mike said to Kizara, who moved with practiced stealth despite her imposing size. Humans don't typically respond to threats by banding together this quickly. The speed of your organization is concerning, Kizara admitted through her translator. In less than 6 hours, you've assembled a fighting force using nothing but local communications. A sharp whistle from ahead made everyone freeze. Jack, one of the trackers, signaled that enemy forces were approaching. Mike watched with pride as his impromptu militia disappeared into pre-planned positions, using techniques that spanned centuries of human warfare. The alien strike team moved into the canyon with perfect military precision, their energy shields humming softly. Mike caught Kizera's eye and nodded. She activated her neural implant, broadcasting on their tactical frequency. "Attention, strike team," her translated voice boomed through the canyon. "This is General Kizera. You are violating local sovereignty and engaging in illegal operations. Stand down." The response came in the form of plasma fire, superheating the rocks where her voice had come from. But the distraction had served its purpose. Above the alien soldiers, ranchers armed with simple pressure washers sprayed the canyon walls. The water, mixed with local mineral deposits, created a conductive slurry that played havoc with the energy shield's electromagnetic field generators. "Impossible," Kizera whispered as the supposedly impenetrable shields flickered and died. "That technology cost billions to develop, and your people disabled it with water and rocks. Sometimes the simplest solutions are the best," Mike replied, signaling the next phase. Veterans with hunting rifles took carefully aimed shots at now exposed joint servos in the alien combat armor, using knowledge Mike had gleaned from Kizera about their weak points. The alien soldiers found their advanced mobility systems failing, forced to fight without their usual technological advantages. The battle turned into exactly the kind of close-quarters, low-tech combat that humans excelled at. The alien soldiers, trained to rely on advanced targeting systems and power-assisted combat moves, struggled against opponents who had learned to fight in the most basic ways possible. The tide turned completely when a gunship swooped into the canyon, its weapons charging. Mike nodded to Sarah from the diner, who had insisted on bringing her grandfather's old tow truck. Its winch cable, augmented with conductive materials, shot out and entangled the gunship's propulsion vents. The alien vessel, designed to resist energy weapons and missiles, had no defense against simple mechanical interference. It spun out of control, forcing an emergency landing. "Your people," Kizera observed as the last alien soldiers surrendered, "are terrifyingly creative when threatened." Mike watched as ranchers used basic rope to secure the alien prisoners. "We've had lots of practice. Every time humanity faces a superior force, we get better at improvising." One of the native trackers, an elderly man named Joseph, approached them. "Like the old stories," he said with a knowing smile. "When the first European ships came, with their steel and guns, we learned, we adapted. Some lessons passed down through generations." Zera's spines rippled with what Mike now recognized as deep thought. "Your species' strength isn't in technology at all, is it? It's in your ability to learn, adapt, and work together despite your differences. That's humanity for you," Mike said, looking at his unlikely army, ranchers, veterans, native trackers, all working seamlessly together. "Individually, we're not that tough, but threaten our homes, our people. We get real resourceful, real quick." The sun had fully risen now, illuminating the aftermath of their victory. As Mike coordinated with his people to secure the area and treat the wounded, both human and alien, he caught Kizera studying the scene with her multifaceted eyes. "Having second thoughts about seeking sanctuary with humans?" he asked. "No," she replied, her translator conveying absolute certainty. "I'm having second thoughts about every tactical assessment my people ever made about your species." Mike's storm cellar had become an impromptu command center, filled with laptops, phones, and jury-rigged communications equipment. The evidence of government corruption and alien conspiracy was spreading faster than either Earth's Defense Council or Kizera's former commanders could contain it. "Another 1,000 shares," Sarah announced, monitoring social media feeds. "People are especially angry about the civilian colony attacks. The videos Kizera provided are going viral." Kizera watched in fascination as humans worldwide began organizing protests against their government's compliance with her species' regime. "Your information networks are chaotic. Every attempt to suppress data just causes it to appear in dozens of new locations. Classic Streisand effect, Mike explained, coordinating with his military contacts through encrypted channels. Try to hide something from humans, we just become more determined to expose it. The cellar's lights flickered as alien vessels began implementing atmospheric communication disruption protocols. Kazera's spines rose in alarm. They're initiating a full blackout. All standard communications will be disabled within hours. Mike just smiled. Watch this. He nodded to Joseph, who keyed his radio. Across the county, ham radio operators began broadcasting the evidence on frequencies that hadn't been used in decades. Local newspapers, running on backup generators, printed special editions with Kizera's revelations. Your people are using primitive technology to bypass our most advanced containment protocols, Kizera said, her translator struggling to convey her mix of admiration and disbelief. Sometimes older is better, Mike replied, helping Sarah set up a network of shortwave radios. Your people expected to control digital networks, but we've got grandparents who never trusted computers in the first place. They're spreading the word through church groups and quilting circles. Reports kept flowing in. University students were writing programs to automatically repost the evidence whenever it was deleted. Activist groups coordinated through ancient pager networks. Rural communities used everything from CB radios to actual paper newsletters. Look at this, Sarah called out, showing them her phone. Crowds had gathered outside government buildings worldwide, their signs demanding answers about alien cooperation. When authorities tried to disperse them, the protesters simply reformed in new locations, coordinating through a dizzying array of platforms and methods. Kazera's neural implant detected increasing panic in her former command's communications. They can't understand how they're losing control of the narrative. Our military doctrine says controlling just 20 key information nodes should silence a primitive species. That's because you're thinking like a military, Mike said, checking a message from one of his veteran contacts. Humans don't just resist through force. We resist through art, through music, through memes. Hell, someone's already written a viral song about your story. The alien general accessed the suggested link, hearing a surprisingly catchy tune about government corruption and alien betrayal. Her spines rippled in what Mike now recognized as amusement. This is being shared millions of times. Because it's entertaining. Welcome to Earth, Sarah laughed. We turn everything into entertainment, even revolution. A deep rumble shook the cellar. Kizera's implant warned of massive ships entering the atmosphere, capital-class vessels capable of implementing planetary control protocols. But instead of fear, she felt something new. Hope. Your people's response, she said slowly, it's not just about the evidence. They're angry about being deceived, yes, but there's something more. They're treating this as a story of right versus wrong, Mike finished. Humans love that. Once people saw you were willing to risk everything to expose the truth, you became the hero of the story. And humans will fight like hell for a good story. Another blast rattled the cellar, but it was drowned out by the sound of vehicles approaching the ranch. Dozens of them, filled with more locals coming to help. Farmers bringing generators, tech enthusiasts with satellite uplinks, elderly couples with stacks of handwritten letters ready to mail. Kazera watched as humans simply refused to be silenced, using everything from cutting-edge technology to ancient methods to keep the truth spreading. Her species had gravely miscalculated. They had assumed that a primitive, divided species would be easy to control. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. 6 months after the failed attempt to suppress the truth, Kazera stood before the first joint graduating class of the Earth Centauri Military Academy. The morning Montana sun glinted off her ceremonial armor, now modified to incorporate elements of human military tradition alongside her own people's insignia. Mike sat in the front row, wearing his dress uniform with new insignia marking him as the Academy's head of unconventional warfare tactics. Their eyes met briefly, sharing a private smile at how far they'd come from that stormy night in his storm cellar. When I crashed on this planet, Kizera began, her translator now perfectly calibrated to convey the nuances of her speech. I believed I was seeking sanctuary from a superior force. I was wrong. I wasn't seeking sanctuary. I was finding my way back to principles my own people had forgotten. The graduating class, a mix of humans and her own species, watched intently. The regime change back home had been swift once the truth spread, not through force of arms, but through the unstoppable tide of public opinion across two worlds. My people believed that technological advancement was the measure of civilization, she continued. We forgot that true strength lies not in the weapons we carry, but in the principles we uphold. It took a human with nothing but courage and conviction to remind me of that truth. In the audience, Sarah from the diner wiped away tears. She turned her restaurant into a command center during those crucial days, coordinating information warfare over coffee and pie. Now she ran the Academy's cultural integration program, teaching alien cadets about human customs and vice versa. You represent something unprecedented. Kizera gestured to the graduating class. Not just an alliance between species, but a recognition that diversity, of thought, of approach, of culture, is not a weakness to be overcome, but a strength to be embraced. Joseph, the native tracker who'd helped them outmaneuver alien forces, nodded approvingly. He now taught a popular course combining ancient Earth survival techniques with advanced alien technology. His students learned to use both neural implants and traditional tracking methods, understanding the value of both. Some called it primitive when humans use water and minerals to disable our shields. Kizera's spines rippled with amusement. They called it primitive when ancient radio technologies bypassed our communications blackout. They called it primitive when human social networks proved impossible to control. She paused, surveying the audience. But that very primitiveness, that ability to strip problems down to their essence, to find solutions in the simplest things, that is humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy. You taught us that advanced doesn't always mean better, that sometimes the old ways are the best ways, that honor and truth matter more than power and technology. The mountain wind carried the scent of pine and sage as Kizera reached her conclusion. I declined reinstatement to my former position, not because I wished to abandon my people, but because I found something more valuable here. In this place, on this supposedly primitive planet, I found what my civilization had lost. The understanding that true strength comes not from dominating others, but from standing together for what's right. Mike stood as she finished, leading the applause that thundered across the Academy grounds. Kizera's remaining hearts beat in sync with the rhythm of the cheers, no longer needing her third combat heart. She had learned from humans that there were better ways to face challenges than pure military might. Later, as they watched the sun set over the Montana mountains from Mike's ranch porch, Kizera reflected on the strange path that had led her here. "Did you ever imagine," she asked Mike, "that hiding an alien fugitive would lead to all this?" Mike smiled, sipping his coffee. "Honestly, no. But that's the thing about doing the right thing. You never know how far the ripples will spread." Kizera's spines shifted in contentment as she observed the first stars appearing overhead. She had come to Earth seeking sanctuary, but she had found something far more precious, a reminder of what it truly meant to be civilized.